The emergency alarm pierced through the coastal morning air like a desperate cry for help. Maya Chun stood at the edge of the helipad, her weathered flight suit catching the salty breeze that rolled in from the Pacific Ocean. She had been a search and rescue pilot for 12 years, but the knot in her stomach told her this mission would be different. The coordinates coming through her radio spoke of a luxury cruise ship in distress, somewhere beyond the horizon where the morning mist still clung to the water like ghostly fingers. Her helicopter, a bright orange Coast Guard MH-60 Jayhawk, sat ready on the tarmac, its rotors gleaming in the early sunlight. Maya ran through her pre-flight checklist with practiced precision, each movement automatic after thousands of hours in the cockpit. Her crew chief, Petty Officer Rodriguez, was already loading rescue equipment into the aircraft cabin. They worked in comfortable silence, both understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. The call had come in at 0530 hours. The cruise ship Celestial Dawn, carrying over 2,000 passengers and crew, had suffered a catastrophic engine failure during a storm. What made this rescue particularly challenging was the ship's location in treacherous waters known for unpredictable weather patterns and dangerous currents. The nearest Coast Guard cutter was still hours away, making helicopter rescue the only viable option for those in immediate danger. Maya climbed into the pilot's seat and began her final systems check. The familiar hum of the helicopter's instruments provided a strange comfort as she prepared for what could be one of the most challenging rescues of her career. Her hands moved expertly across the control panel, each switch and button as familiar as the features of her own face. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like an old friend, heavy but welcomed. As the helicopter lifted off, Maya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with every rescue mission. Below them, the coastal town of Monterey spread out like a child's toy village, the early morning joggers and dog walkers tiny specks moving along the beach. She banked the aircraft toward the open ocean, following the GPS coordinates that would lead them to the disabled cruise ship. The flight out was smooth initially, but as they moved further from shore, Maya noticed the weather beginning to deteriorate. Dark clouds were building on the horizon, and the wind was picking up, causing slight turbulence that made the helicopter shudder occasionally. She adjusted their course slightly, trying to find the smoothest air possible while maintaining their heading toward the emergency. Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset, providing updates from the Coast Guard Command Center. The cruise ship was listing to port, and several passengers had already been injured when the vessel lurched suddenly during the engine failure. The ship's crew was doing their best to manage the situation, but panic was beginning to spread among the passengers as the reality of their predicament became clear. Maya pushed the helicopter harder, knowing that every minute counted in a situation like this. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, its surface now choppy with whitecaps that indicated strengthening winds. She had flown in worse conditions, but the combination of the weather and the complexity of the rescue ahead made this mission particularly daunting. As they approached the coordinates, Maya caught her first glimpse of the Celestial Dawn through the morning haze. The massive ship looked surprisingly small against the vastness of the ocean, and she could see immediately that it was indeed listing badly to one side. Smoke was rising from somewhere near the stern, indicating that the engine problems were more serious than initially reported. The helicopter circled the ship once as Maya assessed the situation. The deck was crowded with passengers, many wearing bright orange life jackets that stood out against the white superstructure of the vessel. She could see crew members trying to organize people into groups, but the crowd looked restless and afraid. The ship's officers would be following emergency protocols, but Maya knew from experience that panic could spread quickly in situations like this. She established radio contact with the ship's bridge, speaking directly to Captain Morrison, a veteran mariner who had been sailing these waters for over 30 years. His voice was calm, but tense as he briefed Maya on the situation. The main engine had suffered a complete failure during the storm, and the backup systems were struggling to maintain power. They were taking on water slowly, not enough to cause immediate sinking, but enough to create the concerning list that was making passengers increasingly nervous. Maya began planning the rescue operation, identifying the best locations on the ship for helicopter operations. The main deck near the stern looked like the most viable option, though the smoke from the engine room was a concern. She would need to position the helicopter carefully to avoid the smoke while still being close enough for safe passenger transfer. The first challenge came sooner than expected. As Maya maneuvered the helicopter into position for the initial rescue attempt, a sudden gust of wind caught the aircraft, pushing it dangerously close to the ship's superstructure. Her years of training kicked in instantly, and she fought the controls to regain stable flight, her heart pounding as the helicopter's rotor blades came within feet of the ship's radio masts. Rodriguez was already preparing the rescue basket, a sturdy metal cage that would be lowered to the ship to bring passengers up one at a time. The process was slow and dangerous in the best of conditions, and the deteriorating weather was making everything more complicated. Maya held the helicopter in a precise hover, fighting the wind gusts while her crew chief operated the rescue hoist. The first passenger to be lifted was an elderly woman who appeared to be suffering from a medical emergency. Maya watched in her mirrors as Rodriguez guided the rescue basket down to the ship's deck, where several crew members helped the woman climb inside. The basket swayed alarmingly in the wind as it was raised, and Maya had to make constant adjustments to keep the helicopter positioned correctly. As the morning progressed, Maya and her crew worked methodically to evacuate the most vulnerable passengers first. Children, elderly individuals, and those with medical conditions took priority following standard rescue protocols. Each lift was a nerve-wracking exercise in precision flying, as Maya struggled to maintain position in the increasingly difficult weather conditions. The wind had picked up significantly since they arrived, and the helicopter was being buffeted constantly. Maya's arms ached from fighting the controls, and sweat dripped down her face despite the cool ocean air. She could feel fatigue beginning to set in, but she pushed it aside, knowing that dozens of lives depended on her ability to maintain precise control of the aircraft. Between rescue attempts, Maya caught glimpses of the passengers still waiting on the ship's deck. Their faces showed a mixture of fear, hope, and determination that reminded her why she had chosen this dangerous profession. Every successful lift brought a sense of satisfaction, knowing that another person was now safe from the growing danger aboard the disabled vessel. The ship's condition was slowly deteriorating. The list had increased noticeably since Maya's arrival, and Captain Morrison reported that they were having difficulty controlling the flooding in the lower decks. The backup generators were struggling to maintain power, and there were concerns about the ship's stability if the weather continued to worsen. Maya realized that they would need additional aircraft to complete the evacuation before the situation became critical. She radioed back to Coast Guard headquarters, requesting immediate assistance from any available rescue helicopters in the region. The response was not encouraging. All other aircraft were either already committed to other emergencies or too far away to reach the scene in time to help. As the rescue operation continued, Maya began to notice signs of increasing panic among the passengers still waiting to be evacuated. The ship's crew was doing their best to maintain order, but the combination of the worsening weather and the vessel's obvious distress was taking its toll on everyone's nerves. She could see arguments breaking out in the crowd, and some passengers were pushing toward the front of the evacuation area, desperate to be among the next to be rescued. The situation reached a critical point when a large wave struck the ship, causing it to lurch violently to one side. Several passengers lost their footing and fell, and Maya could see the rescue area becoming chaotic as people struggled to maintain their balance on the tilted deck. The wave had also pushed the ship closer to some underwater rocks that Captain Morrison had been trying to avoid, adding another layer of danger to an already desperate situation. Maya made the difficult decision to suspend rescue operations temporarily while the ship's crew regained control of the evacuation area. She pulled the helicopter back to a safer distance, watching helplessly as the drama unfolded on the deck below. The ship was now listing at such an angle that normal movement was becoming difficult, and she could see water beginning to wash across the lower sections of the deck. As she hovered at a distance, Maya's mind raced through possible solutions. The standard rescue procedures were proving too slow for the rapidly deteriorating situation. She needed to find a way to evacuate more people more quickly, where they would soon face the nightmare scenario of passengers abandoning ship into the rough seas, where survival would be measured in minutes rather than hours. The radio crackled with increasingly urgent updates from the ship's bridge. Captain Morrison reported that the flooding was accelerating, and he estimated they had perhaps 2 hours before the vessel's stability became critically compromised. Maya looked at the crowd of people still waiting on the deck and realized with growing dread that at their current pace, they would never evacuate everyone in time. The weight of the situation pressed down on Maya like a physical force. Dozens of lives hung in the balance, and the margin for error was shrinking by the minute. She had faced difficult rescues before, but nothing quite like this combination of technical challenges and time pressure. The helicopter was performing well, her crew was experienced and professional, but the fundamental limitations of single-person rescue operations were becoming brutally apparent. As Maya prepared to resume the rescue attempts, she caught sight of another vessel on the horizon. At first, she hoped it might be the Coast Guard cutter arriving ahead of schedule, but as it drew closer, she realized it was actually a private yacht that had apparently responded to the cruise ship's distress calls. While well-intentioned, the yacht was too small to provide significant assistance and would actually complicate the rescue operation by adding another vessel to worry about in the increasingly crowded and dangerous area around the disabled cruise ship. The yacht approached at an alarming speed, its captain apparently unaware of the delicate positioning required for helicopter rescue operations. Maya watched with growing concern as the smaller vessel maneuvered closer to the cruise ship, its weight creating additional turbulence in waters that were already challenging enough for precision flying. She tried to raise the yacht on radio, but there was no response, suggesting either equipment failure or inexperienced operators who didn't understand proper maritime emergency protocols. The situation became even more complicated when Maya realized that several passengers on the cruise ship had noticed the approaching yacht and were apparently considering jumping into the water to swim toward what they perceived as a closer rescue option. The distance was actually much greater than it appeared from the ship's deck, and the water temperature and current conditions would make such an attempt virtually suicidal. Maya urgently radioed Captain Morrison to warn him about the potential for passengers to make this deadly mistake. Rodriguez had been monitoring the radio chatter between various vessels in the area, and he brought Maya's attention to another developing problem. A news helicopter had apparently gotten word of the rescue operation and was approaching the area, undoubtedly hoping to film the dramatic rescue for the evening news. Maya felt her stress level rise another notch as she contemplated the additional safety hazards that would be created by having an unauthorized aircraft operating in the same airspace during an emergency rescue. The weather continued to deteriorate, with wind gusts now reaching 30 knots and visibility beginning to decrease as fog rolled in from the west. Maya could feel the helicopter fighting her constantly now, requiring her full attention just to maintain stable flight. Her arms and shoulders were beginning to cramp from the constant strain of controlling the aircraft in the turbulent conditions. But she forced herself to focus on the task at hand, pushing physical discomfort aside as she had been trained to do. As Maya prepared to resume rescue operations, she noticed movement on the yacht that had positioned itself nearby. Several people appeared to be preparing some kind of small boat, presumably planning to attempt their own rescue efforts. While their intentions were undoubtedly good, Maya knew that amateur rescue attempts in these conditions could easily result in additional casualties that would further complicate an already desperate situation. She managed to establish radio contact with the yacht's captain, a wealthy businessman named Harrison who had apparently volunteered to help after hearing the emergency broadcasts. His lack of experience with maritime rescue operations was immediately apparent from his radio manner and his questions about how he could best assist. Maya tried to diplomatically suggest that the most helpful thing he could do would be to maintain a safe distance and stand by to provide assistance only if specifically requested by the Coast Guard. The conversation was interrupted by urgent calls from the cruise ship's bridge. Captain Morrison reported that the flooding had reached a critical point in one of the lower compartments, and the ship's list had increased dramatically in just the past few minutes. Water was now washing across significant portions of the main deck, making it increasingly dangerous for passengers to maintain their footing in the evacuation area. Maya could see the crisis unfolding from her position above the ship. The crowd of passengers waiting for rescue was becoming increasingly agitated as they watched the water creeping across the deck. Several people were shouting and pointing at the yacht, apparently arguing about whether they should attempt to swim to the smaller vessel. The ship's crew members were doing their best to maintain order, but their own concern was becoming obvious as they realized how quickly their situation was deteriorating. The news helicopter arrived on scene just as Maya was attempting to position her aircraft for another rescue attempt. The media pilot positioned his aircraft much too close to the rescue operation, apparently seeking dramatic camera angles without regard for safety protocols. Maya had to abort her approach and circle away from the ship. Precious time lost while she tried to establish communication with the news crew and convince them to maintain a safe distance. The radio exchange with the news helicopter revealed the pilot to be young and inexperienced, more concerned with getting spectacular footage than understanding the life and death nature of the situation unfolding below. Maya's patience finally snapped, and she used her authority as the lead rescue pilot to order the news helicopter to leave the area immediately or face federal charges for interfering with emergency operations. As the news helicopter reluctantly withdrew to a safer distance, Maya turned her attention back to the cruise ship, only to discover that the situation had deteriorated even further in the few minutes she had been distracted. The ship was now listing at such a severe angle that normal rescue operations were becoming nearly impossible. The rescue basket could no longer be lowered safely to the deck, as the angle made it likely to swing into the ship's superstructure. Captain Morrison's voice over the radio was becoming increasingly strained as he reported that they were losing the battle against flooding. The backup pumps had failed, and water was entering the ship faster than the remaining systems could handle. He estimated they had perhaps 30 minutes before the vessel's stability would be completely compromised, forcing him to give the order to abandon ship. Maya felt a chill run down her spine as she contemplated the implications of a mass abandonment in these sea conditions. The cruise ship carried enough lifeboats for everyone aboard, but launching them in the current weather would be extremely hazardous. Many of the passengers were elderly or not physically capable of handling the demands of survival in rough seas, even with proper safety equipment. She made a desperate decision to attempt rescue operations from a different angle, approaching the ship from the high side where the deck was still partially above water. The maneuver was extremely dangerous, as it required flying the helicopter very close to the ship's superstructure while fighting the unpredictable wind gusts that were being created by the vessel's mass and the surrounding rough seas. Rodriguez understood immediately what Maya was attempting and began preparing the rescue equipment for operations from this more challenging position. The rescue basket would have to be lowered at an angle, making it much more difficult to control, but it might be their only chance to continue evacuations before the ship became completely uninhabitable. The first attempt from this new position was partially successful, but Maya quickly realized that the technique would be much too slow to evacuate the remaining passengers before the ship's condition became critical. Each rescue was taking nearly twice as long as normal, and the physical demands on her as a pilot were becoming extreme as she struggled to maintain precise positioning while fighting both the weather and the aerodynamic effects of flying so close to the large vessel. As Maya hovered in position for another rescue attempt, she noticed increased activity on the yacht nearby. It appeared that Harrison and his crew were indeed launching a small boat, despite her earlier warnings about the dangers of amateur rescue attempts. She watched with growing alarm as the small craft headed toward the cruise ship, its occupants apparently unaware of how quickly conditions could turn deadly for inexperienced rescuers. The small boat's approach created additional complications for Maya's rescue operations. She now had to worry about the safety of the amateur rescuers as well as the cruise ship passengers, and the boat's presence near the ship created another obstacle that she had to avoid while maneuvering the helicopter. The situation was rapidly becoming a nightmare scenario of multiple emergencies occurring simultaneously. Rodriguez alerted Maya to another problem developing aboard the cruise ship. Several passengers had apparently decided not to wait for the slow helicopter evacuation and were preparing to jump into the water, planning to swim to the approaching small boat. The distance was much greater than it appeared from the ship's elevated deck, and the water temperature would quickly incapacitate anyone who attempted to swim without proper thermal protection. Maya tried frantically to communicate with both the ship and the yacht, warning them about the passengers who were preparing to enter the water. Captain Morrison acknowledged her warning and dispatched crew members to try to prevent the dangerous escape attempts, but several passengers had already moved to the ship's rail and appeared ready to jump at any moment. The crisis reached a boiling point when a large wave struck the ship, just as Maya was attempting to lower the rescue basket. The vessel lurched violently, and she had to pull the helicopter away quickly to avoid a collision. As she watched helplessly from a distance, she saw several passengers lose their balance and fall on the steeply angled deck. Some slid toward the water that was now washing across much of the lower deck area. At that moment, Maya witnessed something that would remain burned in her memory for years to come. A young woman in a bright yellow jacket had apparently been helping other passengers maintain their balance when the wave hit. As the ship lurched, she deliberately positioned herself to break the fall of an elderly man who had lost his footing. The action saved the man from sliding into the rising water, but the woman herself was thrown against a deck structure with obvious force. Maya could see that the woman was injured, but still trying to help others around her. Her yellow jacket made her easy to spot among the crowd, and Maya watched as she continued to assist other passengers despite her own obvious pain. There was something about the woman's behavior that seemed different from the other passengers, a calm competence that stood out even from Maya's aerial vantage point. The small boat from the yacht had finally reached the cruise ship, and Maya could see its occupants attempting to help passengers into their craft. However, their inexperience was immediately apparent as they struggled to maintain position alongside the much larger vessel. The boat was being pushed around by the waves, and several times it came dangerously close to being crushed against the cruise ship's hull. Maya made the difficult decision to focus her rescue efforts on the most vulnerable passengers who were furthest from the amateur rescue boat. She positioned the helicopter over a group that included several children and elderly individuals who would have little chance of survival if forced to abandon ship into the rough seas. The rescue basket went down again, and Maya fought to maintain position as Rodriguez guided the first passenger into the safety of the metal cage. As the rescue continued, Maya became increasingly aware of the woman in the yellow jacket. Despite her obvious injury, she seemed to be coordinating passenger movements on the deck, helping people maintain order and positioning them for the most efficient possible evacuation. Her actions suggested either extensive emergency training or natural leadership abilities that were proving invaluable in the chaotic situation. The ship's public address system crackled to life, with Captain Morrison's voice announcing that all passengers should prepare for possible abandonment of the vessel. The announcement, while necessary, had the immediate effect of increasing the panic level among those still waiting for rescue. Maya could see people pushing more aggressively toward the rescue areas, and the carefully maintained order that the crew had worked to establish was beginning to break down. Maya realized that at their current pace, they would never evacuate all the passengers before the ship's condition forced a complete abandonment. She made the painful decision to radio Coast Guard headquarters and recommend that they begin immediate preparations for a mass rescue operation from the water, including alerting all available vessels in the area and positioning additional rescue helicopters as quickly as possible. The response from Coast Guard headquarters was not encouraging. All available rescue helicopters were committed to other emergencies along the coast, and the nearest backup aircraft was still over an hour away. The Coast Guard cutter Steadfast was pushing hard to reach the scene, but even at maximum speed, they were still 45 minutes out. Maya felt the full weight of the situation settling on her shoulders as she realized that the lives of hundreds of people might depend entirely on her ability to continue rescue operations in increasingly impossible conditions. As Maya struggled to maintain her helicopter in position for another rescue attempt, she noticed that the woman in the yellow jacket had moved to a different area of the deck. Despite her injury, she appeared to be organizing a group of passengers around what looked like emergency equipment. From her aerial perspective, Maya couldn't see exactly what the woman was doing, but her actions seemed purposeful and coordinated in a way that suggested professional emergency training. The wind gusts were becoming more violent, and Maya felt the helicopter shudder as a particularly strong gust caught the aircraft broadside. Her fuel gauge was also becoming a concern. The constant hovering in difficult conditions was consuming fuel at a higher rate than normal, and she estimated that they had perhaps 40 minutes of flight time remaining before they would be forced to return to shore for refueling. Rodriguez was doing his best to expedite the rescue operations, but the physics of the situation were working against them. Each passenger had to be carefully secured in the rescue basket, lifted through the turbulent air between the ship and the helicopter, and then safely extracted from the basket once aboard the aircraft. Even working at maximum efficiency, they could only rescue 3 or 4 people every 10 minutes. Maya made a desperate calculation in her head. With nearly 60 passengers still aboard the cruise ship and their current rescue rate, they would need almost 3 hours to evacuate everyone. The ship clearly didn't have 3 hours, and Maya's fuel supply certainly didn't allow for that much additional flying time. Something had to change dramatically, or they would be facing a catastrophic loss of life. The small boat from the yacht was making some progress in evacuating passengers, but Harrison and his crew were clearly struggling with the technical challenges of maintaining position alongside the cruise ship in rough seas. Maya watched as the boat was nearly swamped by a large wave, and she could see that the amateur rescuers were becoming overwhelmed by the conditions they were facing. Captain Morrison's voice over the radio interrupted Maya's thoughts with an urgent update. The ship's main structural supports were beginning to show signs of stress from the unusual forces created by the severe list. Engineering crews below deck reported hearing ominous sound from the vessel's frame, suggesting that catastrophic structural failure might occur much sooner than anyone had anticipated. Maya felt a cold chill as she contemplated the implications of structural failure. If the ship broke apart, passengers would be thrown into the water with little warning and possibly no time to don proper survival gear. The water temperature was cold enough that survival time would be measured in minutes, and the rough seas would make rescue operations virtually impossible. She made another attempt to contact other vessels in the area, broadcasting on emergency frequencies in hopes of finding additional assistance. The response was disappointing, but not surprising. Most commercial vessels were avoiding the area due to the dangerous weather conditions, and those few ships that were nearby were either too small to provide meaningful assistance or too far away to arrive in time. The woman in the yellow jacket had caught Maya's attention again. She appeared to be working with some kind of equipment near the ship's rail, and Maya could see other passengers gathering around her. Whatever she was doing seemed to be having a calming effect on the people nearby, as the group appeared more organized and less panicked than passengers in other areas of the ship. Maya decided to position the helicopter closer to that group, thinking that their apparent organization might make rescue operations more efficient. As she maneuvered the aircraft, she got a better view of what the woman was doing. She appeared to be preparing some kind of emergency equipment, possibly life rafts or additional safety gear that might help passengers survive if they were forced to abandon ship. The realization hit Maya like a physical blow. The woman wasn't just another passenger helping out during the emergency. Her movements, her apparent knowledge of emergency equipment, and her natural leadership during the crisis all suggested that she might be a professional with emergency training. Maya began to wonder if this woman might be someone who could provide crucial assistance in organizing a more efficient evacuation. As Maya held the helicopter in position, she watched the woman coordinate the deployment of what appeared to be an inflatable life raft. The process was being handled with professional competence, and Maya could see that the woman was directing other passengers in proper safety procedures. This was clearly someone with extensive emergency training, possibly military or Coast Guard background. The ship lurched again, this time more violently than before, and Maya had to pull the helicopter away quickly to avoid being caught in the rigging. As she regained a safe position, she could see that the latest movement had caused additional panic among the passengers. Several people had lost their footing and were struggling to maintain their positions on the increasingly tilted deck. Rodriguez reported over the intercom that their rescue basket had been damaged during the last evacuation attempt when it struck part of the ship's superstructure during the violent lurch. While still functional, the basket was no longer as stable as before, making rescue operations even more dangerous and time-consuming. Maya realized that their already slim chances of evacuating everyone were becoming virtually impossible. The woman in the yellow jacket had managed to get the life raft inflated and was now helping passengers climb into it. Maya watched with growing respect as the woman maintained calm control of the situation, ensuring that the most vulnerable passengers were secured in the raft first. Her actions were saving lives even as the ship's condition continued to deteriorate around them. Captain Morrison came back on the radio with news that sent a chill through Maya's entire crew. The ship's engineers reported that the flooding had reached critical systems, and they were losing the ability to control the vessel's stability. He estimated they had perhaps 15 minutes before he would be forced to give the order to abandon ship completely. Maya looked down at the scene below and felt the weight of impossible decisions. With 15 minutes remaining and dozens of passengers still aboard, there was simply no way to evacuate everyone using conventional helicopter rescue techniques. She would have to find another solution or watch helplessly as hundreds of people were forced into the churning seas with little chance of survival. The yacht's small boat had managed to take aboard about a dozen passengers, but it was now so overloaded that it was riding dangerously low in the water. Maya could see that Harrison and his crew were struggling to control the heavily laden craft, and she worried that their amateur rescue efforts might result in additional casualties if the boat was swamped by the rough seas. Maya made a decision that went against all her training and experience. She was going to attempt to land the helicopter directly on the cruise ship's deck, despite the extreme dangers involved. The ship was listing badly, the deck was wet and unstable, and landing a large helicopter on a moving vessel in rough seas was almost certainly suicide. But it was the only way she could think of to evacuate large numbers of passengers quickly enough to beat the ship's deteriorating condition. She radioed her intentions to both Captain Morrison and her own Coast Guard headquarters, knowing that both would probably order her not to attempt such a dangerous maneuver. The response was immediate and predictable. She was ordered to maintain safe flight operations and not to risk the helicopter and crew in an attempt that had little chance of success. Maya looked down at the passengers still trapped on the ship's deck and made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She was going to ignore the order and attempt the landing anyway. The lives of dozens of people hung in the balance, and she couldn't live with herself if she didn't try everything possible to save them, even if it meant risking her own life and career. Rodriguez understood immediately what Maya was planning when he saw her begin to descend toward the ship. His voice came over the intercom, calm and professional despite the extreme danger they were about to face. He simply said, "I'm with you, pilot. Let's bring these people home." The woman in the yellow jacket had noticed the helicopter's descent and was apparently directing passengers to clear a landing area on the ship's deck. Maya watched with amazement as the woman took charge of the situation with obvious professional competence, positioning people and equipment to facilitate the dangerous landing attempt. Whatever this woman's background, she clearly understood exactly what Maya was trying to accomplish. As Maya began the final approach to the tilted deck of the cruise ship, she felt the familiar calm focus that came over her during the most dangerous moments of her career. The wind was gusting violently, the ship was moving unpredictably beneath her, and the margin for error was essentially zero. But somewhere below, dozens of people were counting on her to succeed, and Maya Chun had never failed a rescue mission in 12 years of Coast Guard service. The helicopter descended through the turbulent air, every gust threatening to push the aircraft into the ship's superstructure or the churning seas below. Maya's hands moved instinctively on the controls, making constant adjustments as she fought to bring the helicopter down in a controlled manner. The sound of the rotors echoed off the ship's structures, creating a deafening roar that added to the chaos of the emergency situation. The woman in the yellow jacket was now clearly visible on the deck below, and Maya could see her directing the final preparations for the helicopter's arrival. There was something about her calm competence and professional demeanor that gave Maya additional confidence in the dangerous maneuver she was attempting. Whoever this woman was, she understood exactly what was happening and was doing everything possible to make the rescue attempt successful. The helicopter's landing gear touched the ship's deck with a jarring impact that sent vibrations through the entire aircraft. Maya immediately felt the danger of their situation, as the helicopter was now subject to the same unstable movements that were affecting the cruise ship. The deck was tilted at such an angle that the helicopter was constantly trying to slide toward the lower side, and Maya had to maintain power to the rotors to keep the aircraft positioned correctly. Rodriguez was already opening the helicopter's side door, shouting instructions to the passengers who were gathered nearby. The woman in the yellow jacket was the first to reach the aircraft, and Maya was surprised to see her directing other passengers rather than climbing aboard herself. Even in the midst of the emergency, this woman was putting others first, ensuring that children and elderly passengers were loaded into the helicopter before considering her own safety. The loading process was chaotic, but surprisingly efficient, thanks largely to the organization provided by the woman in the yellow jacket. Maya watched in her side mirror as passengers were helped aboard the helicopter in a steady stream, each person carefully guided by the woman, who seemed to understand exactly how to maximize the aircraft's capacity while maintaining safety protocols. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the radio with an urgent warning. The ship's structural supports were failing faster than anticipated, and he could see visible cracks appearing in the deck plating near the superstructure. The vessel was beginning to break apart under the stresses created by the flooding, and the extreme list. He estimated they had perhaps 5 minutes before catastrophic structural failure would make any rescue attempts impossible. Maya felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool ocean air flowing through the helicopter's open doors. The aircraft was now carrying nearly twice its normal passenger load, and she could feel the strain on the helicopter's systems as the overloaded aircraft struggled to maintain position on the unstable deck. Every few seconds, a wave would strike the ship and cause the entire vessel to shudder, threatening to dislodge the helicopter or cause it to slide into the churning water below. The woman in the yellow jacket was still directing passengers toward the helicopter, but Maya could see that she was clearly in pain from her earlier injury. Blood was visible on her jacket, and she was favoring one side as she moved around the deck. Despite her obvious discomfort, she continued to work with professional efficiency, helping to load the most vulnerable passengers while maintaining calm control of what could have easily become a panic stampede. Rodriguez reported that they were approaching the helicopter's maximum safe weight capacity, but there were still a dozen passengers waiting to be evacuated. Maya faced an impossible decision. She could attempt to take everyone aboard and risk a crash that would kill everyone, or she could leave some passengers behind and hope that other rescue assets would arrive in time to save them. The decision was made for her when another massive wave struck the cruise ship, causing the vessel to lurch so violently that several passengers were thrown to the deck. Maya felt the helicopter slide several feet across the tilted surface, and only quick action on the flight controls prevented the aircraft from toppling over the side into the ocean. The near disaster convinced her that they had to leave immediately before the ship's movements caused a catastrophic accident. As Maya began to increase power to lift off from the dangerous deck, she saw the woman in the yellow jacket step back from the helicopter. Maya realized with horror that the woman was not planning to come aboard with this group of evacuees. She was staying behind with the remaining passengers, apparently planning to help them until additional rescue assets could arrive. Maya's training told her to lift off immediately and get the passengers she had already rescued to safety. But something about the woman's calm professionalism and obvious expertise made her hesitate. This woman might be the key to organizing the remaining passengers for efficient rescue when Maya returned with the next helicopter, assuming there would be time for additional rescue attempts. The helicopter lifted off from the cruise ship's deck with difficulty, the overloaded aircraft struggling to gain altitude in the turbulent conditions. Maya could feel the strain on every system as the helicopter fought to climb away from the ship. Below them, she could see the woman in the yellow jacket already working to organize the passengers who had been left behind, preparing them for the next rescue attempt. As they flew toward shore, Maya maintained radio contact with Captain Morrison, who provided increasingly alarming updates about the ship's condition. The structural damage was accelerating, and he reported that sections of the lower decks were beginning to collapse as the flooding reached critical levels. The ship was literally breaking apart beneath the remaining passengers and crew. The flight back to shore seemed to take an eternity, though Maya knew it was actually less than 20 minutes. Every second that passed meant the remaining passengers were in greater danger, and she could only hope that the woman in the yellow jacket would be able to keep them organized and safe until rescue assets could return to complete the evacuation. Maya landed at the Coast Guard station and immediately began preparations for a return flight. The passengers they had rescued were quickly transferred to waiting ambulances and emergency personnel, while Maya and Rodriguez worked frantically to refuel the helicopter and prepare for another rescue mission. Every minute counted, and Maya knew that the structural integrity of the cruise ship was probably measured in minutes rather than hours. The refueling process seemed to take forever, though the ground crew worked with practiced efficiency. Maya used the time to contact Coast Guard headquarters and demand updates on additional rescue assets. The news was mixed. Another rescue helicopter was finally en route, but was still 30 minutes away from the scene. A Coast Guard cutter had also increased speed and was now 20 minutes from reaching the disabled cruise ship. As Maya prepared to lift off for the return flight, she received a radio call that chilled her to the bone. Captain Morrison reported that the cruise ship was beginning to break apart more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. Large sections of the superstructure were showing signs of imminent collapse, and he estimated that he would be forced to order complete abandonment within the next 10 minutes. Maya felt sick as she contemplated the implications. Even flying at maximum speed, It would take her nearly 15 minutes to return to the ship. By the time she arrived, the remaining passengers would likely be in the water, struggling to survive in rough seas with inadequate survival equipment. The woman in the yellow jacket and everyone else who had stayed behind would be fighting for their lives in conditions that offered little hope of survival. The helicopter lifted off with Maya, pushing the aircraft harder than she had ever pushed it before. She climbed rapidly and set a direct course for the cruise ship, knowing that every second might make the difference between life and death for the people still trapped aboard the rapidly deteriorating vessel. Rodriguez was preparing the rescue equipment for water rescue operations, understanding that they might well arrive to find survivors floating in the ocean rather than passengers waiting on a stable deck. As they flew toward the emergency site, Maya tried to maintain radio contact with the cruise ship, but the responses were becoming increasingly fragmented and difficult to understand. The ship's communication systems were apparently being affected by the structural damage, and she feared that complete radio failure might be imminent, leaving the rescue efforts without crucial coordination from the vessel's crew. The ocean came into view ahead of them, and Maya could see smoke rising from the area where the cruise ship should be. As they drew closer, she was horrified to see that the vessel was now listing so severely that it was almost lying on its side. Large sections of the superstructure had indeed collapsed, and debris was scattered across the water around the ship. Maya scanned the water desperately for signs of survivors, fearing that she would find only wreckage and bodies. The sight that greeted her was both better and worse than she had feared. Several life rafts were visible in the water, apparently deployed by the ship's crew in the final moments before abandonment. But the rafts were scattered across a wide area, and many appeared to be only partially inflated or damaged by debris from the collapsing ship. One life raft caught Maya's attention immediately because of its bright yellow emergency markings. As she maneuvered the helicopter closer, she could see that it contained a large number of survivors, and someone in a yellow jacket was clearly visible coordinating activities within a raft. Maya felt a surge of relief as she realized that the woman who had shown such professional competence during the deck rescue had apparently survived the ship's final moments and was continuing to provide leadership for the other survivors. Rodriguez was already preparing the rescue basket for water recovery operations, a much more difficult and dangerous process than lifting passengers from a stable deck. The helicopter would have to hover precisely over each life raft while fighting ocean winds and the downdraft from their own rotors, which would create additional turbulence on the water surface below. Maya positioned the helicopter over the first life raft and was amazed to see the level of organization among the survivors. The woman in the yellow jacket was clearly directing activities, and the passengers in the raft were positioned and prepared for rescue in a way that suggested professional emergency training. Even floating in rough seas after surviving the traumatic collapse of a cruise ship, this remarkable woman was still taking care of others and facilitating their rescue. The first few rescues from the life rafts went more smoothly than Maya had dared to hope. The survivors were prepared and cooperative, following the woman's directions to make the rescue operations as efficient as possible. Maya began to feel cautiously optimistic that they might actually save everyone who had made it off the ship alive. But as they moved from raft to raft, Maya noticed that several of the survivors appeared to be suffering from exposure and possible injuries sustained during the ship's final collapse. The woman in the yellow jacket was clearly injured herself, but she continued to refuse rescue, insisting that other passengers be lifted to safety first. Maya watched with growing concern as the woman's condition appeared to deteriorate, even as she maintained her focus on helping others. The arrival of the second Coast Guard helicopter and the Coast Guard cutter Steadfast transformed the rescue operation into a coordinated effort involving multiple assets. Maya was finally able to focus on specific life rafts while other rescue crews handled the broader search and recovery operation. The additional resources made it possible to evacuate survivors much more quickly and provided medical care for those who needed immediate attention. As the rescue operation continued with multiple assets now on scene, Maya finally had the opportunity to focus specifically on rescuing the woman in the yellow jacket. She positioned her helicopter over the life raft where the woman was still coordinating survivor activities, despite her obvious injuries and exhaustion. Maya could see that the woman was struggling to remain conscious, but was still refusing to be evacuated before the other passengers in her raft. Rodriguez lowered the rescue basket one more time, and Maya watched as the other survivors essentially forced the woman to accept rescue. Even then, she was giving instructions to the remaining passengers in the raft, ensuring they understood how to signal the other rescue aircraft and maintain their safety until help arrived. Maya had never seen such dedication and selflessness under such extreme conditions. As the woman was lifted toward the helicopter, Maya got her first clear look at the person who had been instrumental in organizing the evacuation and saving so many lives. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with short brown hair and intelligent eyes that remained alert despite her obvious pain and exhaustion. Her yellow jacket bore official markings that Maya couldn't quite make out from her position in the cockpit. Once the woman was safely aboard the helicopter, Rodriguez began providing emergency medical care while Maya headed toward shore. The woman was conscious but clearly suffering from hypothermia, possible internal injuries, and extreme exhaustion. Despite her condition, her first words to Rodriguez were questions about whether all the other passengers had been rescued safely. During the flight to shore, Maya learned through Rodriguez's radio communications with the medical team that the woman had suffered several broken ribs and possible internal bleeding during the ship's collapse, but had continued to help others throughout the entire ordeal. She had been instrumental in organizing the life raft deployments and maintaining order among panicked passengers during the most dangerous moments of the emergency. As they approached the Coast Guard station, Maya couldn't help but wonder about the background and training that had enabled this remarkable woman to perform so effectively under such extreme pressure. Her actions had clearly saved numerous lives, and her calm leadership had been crucial to the success of the entire rescue operation. Maya made a mental note to find out more about this extraordinary person once the immediate medical emergency was handled. The helicopter landed at the Coast Guard medical facility, where a team of paramedics and doctors was waiting to provide immediate care for the injured woman. As she was transferred to a stretcher, the woman managed to catch Maya's eye and mouthed the words "thank you" before being rushed into the emergency treatment area. Maya felt a profound sense of respect for this person who had shown such courage and selflessness throughout the crisis. Over the following hours, as Maya completed her mission reports and debriefed with Coast Guard officials, she learned the final statistics from the rescue operation. Despite the catastrophic failure of the cruise ship, all 127 remaining passengers and crew members have been successfully rescued from the water. The coordinated efforts of multiple rescue assets had prevented what could have been a massive loss of life in one of the worst maritime disasters in recent memory. Maya also learned that the woman in the yellow jacket was recovering well in the base hospital, though she would require several days of treatment for her injuries. The medical staff reported that she had been asking constantly about the welfare of the other passengers, showing the same concern for others that had characterized her behavior throughout the entire emergency. The next morning, Maya received permission to visit the woman in the hospital. She found her sitting up in bed, looking much better despite the obvious signs of her ordeal. Maya introduced herself as the helicopter pilot who had conducted the rescue, and was surprised by the woman's immediate response of gratitude and professional respect for Maya's dangerous decision to land on the ship's deck. During their conversation, Maya learned that the woman's name was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and she was actually a Coast Guard helicopter pilot herself, currently on leave while recovering from a previous injury sustained during a rescue mission 6 months earlier. She had been taking a cruise vacation as part of her recovery process when the emergency occurred, and her training had automatically kicked in when she realized the severity of the situation. Maya felt a mixture of embarrassment and amazement as she realized that she had been unknowingly working alongside a fellow rescue pilot throughout the entire operation. Dr. Mitchell's expertise and training explained her remarkable competence during the emergency, but it also made Maya realize how professional courtesy and respect should have led her to recognize a colleague's capabilities rather than initially viewing her as just another passenger. Dr. Mitchell explained that she had immediately recognized the challenges Maya was facing during the helicopter rescue attempts and had tried to organize the passengers to make the evacuation as efficient as possible. She had stayed behind during the first helicopter evacuation because she knew that her experience would be crucial for coordinating the remaining passengers if the ship's condition continued to deteriorate. The two pilots spent several hours discussing the technical aspects of the rescue operation, sharing insights about decision-making under extreme pressure and the challenges of conducting helicopter rescues in dangerous conditions. Maya was struck by Dr. Mitchell's analysis of the operation and her generous assessment of Maya's performance during some of the most difficult flying conditions imaginable. Dr. Mitchell revealed that she had actually been planning to return to active duty in the coming months, pending final medical clearance from her previous injuries. The cruise ship rescue had convinced her that she was ready to resume full flight operations, though her doctors were insisting on additional recovery time after her latest injuries. As their conversation continued, Maya learned more about Dr. Mitchell's background and experience. She was a 15-year veteran of Coast Guard aviation, with over 3,000 flight hours and numerous commendations for heroic rescues. She had been involved in some of the most challenging rescue operations along the West Coast, including several that had received national attention for their complexity and danger. Maya found herself developing deep respect for Dr. Mitchell's professionalism and dedication, but also felt somewhat humbled by the realization that she had initially failed to recognize a fellow professional. The experience taught her valuable lessons about making assumptions about people based on their apparent circumstances rather than observing their actual capabilities and performance. Dr. Mitchell, for her part, expressed nothing but admiration for Maya's willingness to take extraordinary risks to save the lives of strangers. She pointed out that the decision to land the helicopter on the unstable cruise ship had been both technically brilliant and incredibly courageous, representing exactly the kind of innovative thinking that distinguished great pilots from merely competent ones. The two women discovered that they had much in common beyond their shared profession. Both had chosen Coast Guard aviation because of a desire to help others in emergency situations, and both had faced challenges in a profession that was still predominantly male. They had both experienced the unique pressures of making life and death decisions while flying complex aircraft in dangerous conditions. As Maya prepared to leave the hospital, Dr. Mitchell mentioned that she would be writing a formal commendation letter recommending Maya for recognition of her extraordinary performance during the cruise ship rescue. She emphasized that Maya's decision-making and flying skills had been instrumental in preventing a catastrophic loss of life, and that her actions deserved official recognition from the Coast Guard. Maya left the hospital with mixed feelings. She was honored by Dr. Mitchell's praise and grateful for the opportunity to have worked alongside such a distinguished colleague, even unknowingly. But she was also somewhat troubled by the realization that she had initially viewed Dr. Mitchell as just another passenger rather than recognizing her as a fellow professional who was contributing significantly to the rescue effort. The experience prompted Maya to reflect on her own assumptions and biases and how they might affect her interactions with others in the future. She realized that professional competence and expertise could come from unexpected sources, and that she needed to be more observant and open-minded when working in emergency situations where every person's contributions might be valuable. In the weeks that followed, Maya received several commendations for her performance during the cruise ship rescue, including recognition from Coast Guard headquarters and appreciation letters from the families of passengers she had helped save. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from Dr. Mitchell, who continued to correspond with Maya and eventually became both a professional colleague and a personal friend. The cruise ship rescue became a defining moment in Maya's career, not just because of the technical challenges and successful outcome, but because of the lessons she learned about recognizing and respecting the contributions of others. The woman in the yellow jacket had taught her that heroism and expertise could appear in unexpected forms, and that true professionalism meant acknowledging and supporting the capabilities of others rather than assuming that only officially designated personnel could make meaningful contributions to emergency operations. Dr. Mitchell eventually returned to active duty and was assigned to a Coast Guard station only a few hours flight time from Maya's base. The two pilots occasionally worked together on complex rescue operations, and their shared experience during the cruise ship emergency created a bond of mutual respect and professional trust that enhanced their effectiveness as a rescue team. Maya often reflected on the cruise ship rescue as a reminder of the importance of keeping an open mind about people's capabilities and contributions. The woman in the yellow jacket had been far more than she had initially appeared, and her expertise and leadership had been crucial to saving dozens of lives. Maya carried this lesson forward throughout the rest of her career, always watching for unexpected sources of competence and support during emergency operations. Years later, when Maya was promoted to senior pilot and began training new Coast Guard aviators, she would often tell the story of the cruise ship rescue as an example of how emergency situations could bring out the best in people, and how important it was to recognize and support the contributions of everyone involved in rescue operations. The woman in the yellow jacket had become a symbol in Maya's mind of the professionalism and dedication that characterized the best of Coast Guard service, regardless of whether someone was officially on duty or simply acting according to their training and instincts when others needed help.